Welcome to our channel. Today, we're diving into this book, The Courage to be Disliked, by Ichiro Kishimi and Fumitake Koga.
Oh, yeah.
Have you had a chance to check it out?
I have. Yeah. It's one of those books that really makes you think, you know?
Yeah.
And what I think is so interesting about it is the way that it presents Adlerian psychology.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's framed as this dialogue between a youth and this philosopher.
Yeah.
So it feels very personal and almost like you're part of the conversation as you're reading it.
It's not a typical psychology textbook.
No, not at all.
It really kind of dives into some pretty deep ideas and some thought-provoking concepts.
Yeah.
For example, the book argues that all our problems are really rooted in our relationships with other people.
Yeah.
What was your take on that?
Well, that's definitely a bold statement.
Yeah.
But I think what's fascinating is how it really challenges this traditional cause and effect view of psychology.
Okay.
So, instead of saying, I'm afraid of public speaking because of this bad experience I had back in school, Adlerian psychology would say, well, what purpose does this fear serve me now?
Interesting.
Right now in this moment.
So maybe it's keeping me from, pursuing a career that I'd actually love.
Exactly.
Or preventing me from connecting with people who could enrich my life or whatever.
Exactly. It's about understanding the goal of our behavior in the present, not just dwelling on those past causes.
Okay.
And it's interesting because they have a word for that in Adlerian psychology. It's called teleology.
Teleology. Okay, so teleology is all about the why behind our actions today.
Yeah.
Not necessarily what happened to us yesterday or 10 years ago or whatever.
Yeah, and I think when you start to look at things through that lens, it can be really powerful.
I'm starting to see how that could be a powerful shift in thinking.
It can be quite liberating because instead of feeling trapped by your past, you start to see yourself as the architect of your present experience. You have the power to choose differently.
This next idea that we're going to talk about really blew my mind.
Okay.
The book argues that we even choose our emotions to achieve specific goals.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, who chooses to be angry?
Right. It's not always a conscious choice.
Right.
But the book gives this really interesting example of anger being a tool for shouting.
Okay.
So think about it. We might get angry to assert ourselves in a situation where we feel powerless or to avoid having a difficult conversation.
Okay.
So it's interesting to look at it that way.
It really is. It makes you wonder, have I ever used anger to get what I want, even unconsciously?
Yeah.
It's definitely something to reflect on.
For sure.
And if you're looking for more motivational content to guide you on this journey of self-discovery, I'd recommend checking out Affirmify Journey on YouTube.
Oh, yeah.
They have some great videos on personal growth and overcoming challenges.
Definitely worth checking out.
Now, speaking of challenging conventional wisdom,
Yes.
the book takes this idea of choosing our emotions even further and connects it to the concept of freedom.
Interesting.
And here's where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
The book actually defines freedom as being disliked by other people.
Wow.
How can that be freeing?
That's a paradox, isn't it?
It is.
But what the authors are getting at is that true freedom means living in accordance with your own values, even if that means not everyone will approve.
So it's about having the courage to be your authentic self, even if it means risking rejection or disapproval.
Exactly.
And it makes me think about that woman in the book who had this debilitating fear of blushing.
Yeah.
She was so afraid of being judged that she was limiting her own life.
Totally. And she was letting the potential for disapproval dictate her actions. And, one of the things that the book encourages us to do is to really focus on what we can control, which is our own thoughts and behaviors.
Okay.
And let go of what we can't, which is other people's opinions.
Right.
They even have a term for this. It's called the separation of tasks.
Separation of tasks. I like
Yeah.
that. It's you can't control whether somebody likes you or not.
Right.
But you can control how you react to their judgment.
Exactly.
You can choose to be kind to yourself, regardless of what other people think.
Yeah, and it's important to note that this doesn't mean isolating yourself from others.
Right.
It's more about understanding where your responsibility ends and another person's begins.
That's a good point. That reminds me of the story of Alexander the Great and the Gordian knot.
Oh, yeah.
He was faced with this seemingly impossible knot that no one could untie.
Right.
So he just sliced right through it with his sword.
He took a very direct approach.
He did. And it's the book is encouraging us to find those bold, unconventional solutions to the problems that are holding us back in our lives.
I love that.
Yeah.
It's a great analogy.
Thanks.
It's interesting, though, because like all this talk about freedom and separating tasks,
Right.
it might make it seem like Adlerian psychology is encouraging this sort of like detached individualism,
Right.
but that's not really the case at all.
That's a good point.
Right.
It does make you wonder, if we're not supposed to be seeking validation from other people, then what's the point of connection and community?
Yeah.
How does that fit into the picture?
Well, Adlerian psychology actually places a lot of emphasis on this idea of community feeling,
Community feeling?
which is this sense of belonging.
Oh, wow.
This feeling of being connected to something larger than yourself.
So it's not about just like cutting everybody off and going it alone.
Not at all.
Okay.
But the book does make this distinction between genuine community feeling and then just being self-centered.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What's the difference?
Well, that's where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
The book argues that people who are constantly seeking recognition or validation from others are actually quite self-centered, even if they appear outwardly focused.
So it's not just about being popular or having a ton of friends on social media.
Exactly.
It's about like the quality of those connections.
Yes.
And a genuine desire to contribute to something larger than yourself.
Precisely. And the book even uses the example of wealthy people who engage in philanthropy.
Okay.
And it suggests that their motivation isn't always pure altruism.
Right.
Often it's driven by this need to feel valuable, to confirm their place in the community.
It's like they're trying to buy their way into belonging.
Yeah.
That's a pretty thought-provoking idea.
It is.
And it makes me think about the book's stance on praise.
Yeah.
It's pretty unconventional.
Yeah, it is.
It suggests that praise, especially in those vertical relationships where there's a power dynamic, can actually be a form of manipulation.
That's a really key point, and I think it's important to remember that this isn't about like rejecting all forms of positive feedback.
Right.
But it is about recognizing the potential for praise to create dependency.
Right.
And undermine genuine self-worth.
So instead of seeking constant validation from other people, we should be focusing on developing a sense of like intrinsic value.
Exactly. And the book actually suggests that thank you is a much more powerful expression than praise, because it's about expressing gratitude for someone's being, not judging their actions as good or bad.
That's such a subtle but important distinction.
It is.
It shifts the focus from evaluation to appreciation.
Yeah.
It makes me think about all the different types of relationships we have in our lives. The book talks about, horizontal versus vertical relationships.
Yes.
Can you explain the difference between those?
Yes. So vertical relationships are those that have this clear power dynamic.
Okay.
Like a boss and an employee.
Right.
Or parent and child, teacher and student. There's a sense of hierarchy and judgment built in.
Gotcha.
Horizontal relationships, on the other hand, are based on equality and mutual respect.
So like close friendships.
Yes.
Partnerships where both people feel like seen and valued.
Exactly.
Right.
And the book suggests that cultivating more horizontal relationships is key to fostering genuine connection and belonging.
This is all really resonating with me, making me think about my own relationships and where I might be, seeking validation or perpetuating these power dynamics.
Absolutely.
What about you? What stands out to you the most about this whole concept of community feeling and the different types of relationships that we form?
What strikes me is this emphasis on personal responsibility.
Okay.
It's so easy to fall into the trap of blaming others for our unhappiness or feeling like we're constantly seeking approval. But this book really challenges us to take ownership of our own feelings and choices.
And to recognize that we have the power to create more fulfilling relationships by focusing on, genuine connection and contribution.
Exactly.
Rather than seeking validation or trying to control other people.
Right. And it all ties back to this central idea of courage. It takes courage to be disliked. To step outside of those vertical relationships and to build a life based on your own values.
Speaking of courage, there's another concept in the book that I think really challenges conventional thinking. This idea that life is not a linear path.
Interesting.
With a clear beginning, middle, and end. Yeah, it's like we're so conditioned to think about life in terms of these goals and achievements.
Right.
Get good grades, go to college land, a great job, get married, buy a house, retire.
Yeah.
It's like we're always striving for that next milestone.
And the book really challenges that whole notion.
Yeah.
It argues that life is not a linear path, but rather a series of moments. It's about living fully in the here and now, rather than constantly chasing after some future ideal.
It's a really powerful concept. It makes me think about how often I get caught up in worries about the future or regrets about the past. It's like, I'm missing out on the present moment because I'm so focused on what's not happening.
Yeah, the book uses this really beautiful analogy of a dancer. A dancer doesn't focus on reaching a specific destination on the stage.
Right.
The joy is in the movement, the rhythm, the feeling of the dance itself.
Yeah. That's such a great way to put it. It's about finding the joy in the process.
Exactly.
Not just the outcome.
Yeah.
So how do we actually apply this to our lives?
Yeah.
Like, how do we shift our focus to the present moment?
Well, I think it starts with awareness.
Okay.
Noticing when your mind is wandering to the past or the future and gently bringing it back to the present.
Okay.
What do you see, hear, or smell, taste right now?
That's a good point. It's about engaging all of our senses.
Yes.
And really being present in the moment.
Exactly.
It sounds simple, but I imagine it takes practice.
It does, but the more you practice, the more natural it becomes.
Okay.
And the book argues that this is where true happiness lies, in embracing the present moment rather than placing all these conditions on our happiness.
That reminds me of something the book said about, one of the biggest life lies we tell ourselves.
Oh, yeah.
Is that if only such and such were the case, I would be happy.
Right. It's like saying, if only I had a bigger house, or if only I got that promotion, then I'd finally be content. But those are just conditions we're placing on our happiness.
Yeah, it's like a recipe for perpetual unhappiness.
It is.
Because there will always be something else to strive for.
Exactly. And Adlerian psychology really suggests that true happiness is available to us right now, regardless of our circumstances.
It's about shifting our focus from what we lack to what we have, from what's wrong to what's right.
Exactly. It's about choosing gratitude over dissatisfaction.
And, this all ties back to the book's central theme of courage.
Does.
It takes courage to let go of those conditions, to embrace the present moment, and to find that fulfillment in the here and now.
Absolutely. And, the book also points to contribution to others as a key element of this journey. By focusing on making a positive impact, even in small ways, we can cultivate this sense of purpose and belonging that transcends our individual circumstances.
So it's about finding that balance between self-acceptance and contributing to something larger than ourselves.
Exactly.
And having the courage to live authentically, even if it means being disliked by some people.
Right. It's about recognizing that we have the power to choose happiness, to choose courage, to choose a life that aligns with our values. And that journey starts right now.
So to wrap things up, the courage to be disliked offers a really refreshing and empowering perspective on life and happiness.
I agree.
It's not a quick fix or a set of easy answers, but it does provide some really valuable tools for creating a more fulfilling life.
It's a book that stays with you long after you finish reading it.
It does.
And hopefully it sparks some meaningful reflection and positive change in your own life.
So here's a final thought for you to ponder. How can you start applying these principles to your own life today? What small step can you take to embrace the present moment, to cultivate a sense of community, or to have the courage to be your true self?
And if you're looking for additional resources to support you on your personal growth journey, I highly recommend checking out lingopediamagazine.com.
Oh yeah, that's a great resource.
They have tons of courses and ebooks on topics like self-improvement, mindfulness, building meaningful relationships.
Awesome. Well, we hope you enjoyed this deep dive into the courage to be disliked.
Yes.
If you found it helpful, please don't forget to subscribe, share, and like this podcast so we can continue to bring you insightful conversations on topics that matter. Thanks for listening.